Renewing the mind is harder than changing behavior. The difference between modification and transformation. Here's the grand question. Can behavior permanently change if the mind remains unchanged? Well, let's dig into it. Who are you becoming? Have you ever noticed how quickly people can change their behavior and how slowly they change their thinking? January arrives and gyms become crowded. New books are purchased. New goals are written. They're written down. New disciplines are enthusiastically embraced. Social media becomes filled with declaration of change. Then February quietly arrives. For many people, what disappeared was never merely a behavior. What disappeared was borrowed motivation. Because behavior can change remarkably quickly, thinking usually change much more slowly. That distinction matters. Perhaps one of the great misconceptions of spiritual growth is the belief that transformation primarily occurs through behavior. Behavior modification, they call it. Consequently, much of the modern culture has become fascinated with asking questions such as, how do I become more disciplined? How do I stop procrastinating? How do I become successful? How do I become spiritually matured? How do I overcome this particular struggle? They are good questions. They simply do not go deep enough. Because perhaps there is another question worth asking first. Who are you becoming? Jesus was never merely interested in producing better behavior. He was interested in producing transformed people. Before he ever sent his disciples to preach, he first invited them to follow him. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. Notice the order. Following precedes sending. Formation precedes function. Becoming precedes building. Modern culture has largely reversed that process. We have become fascinated with performance while becoming increasingly impatient with formation. Yet throughout Scripture, God remains remarkably patient while forming people. Perhaps because God understands something we often forget. God is rarely interested in merely changing what people do. He's deeply interested in changing who they are becoming. The truth is woven throughout Scripture, and perhaps nowhere more beautifully than Romans chapter 12. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Notice carefully what Paul does not say. He does not begin with behavior. He begins with the mind. And perhaps this is why renewing the mind is harder than changing behavior. Behavior can temporarily modify it in a moment. Transformation usually unfolds slowly through truth repeatedly embraced over time. Here's some biblical foundation for you. God always goes deeper. There is something fascinating about the ministry of Jesus. Jesus repeatedly moves beneath what people can see and addresses what they often overlook. People see blindness. Jesus sees faith. People see sin. Jesus sees heart. People see behavior. Jesus addresses motives. Even when confronting the religious leaders of his days, Jesus says, "Woe to you, Teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Matthew chapter 23, verse 25. Think about that for a moment. Jesus is not criticizing cleanliness. Jesus is confronting superficial transformation. The outside changed, the inside remained untouched. Could it be that many believers have unknowingly adopted the same approach to spiritual growth? We attempt to become more disciplined. We attempt to become more productive. We attempt to become more successful. We attempt to become more spiritual while neglecting the thinking, continually producing our behavior. Jesus refuses to separate outward conduct from inward formation. Likewise, Solomon writes, "For as he thinks within himself, so he is. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is." Proverbs 23, verse 7. Long before neuroscience discovered the remarkable ability of the human brain, Scripture had already introduced the revolutionary idea that transformation begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Perhaps one of the great tragedies of modern Christianity is that many people have spent years fighting fruit while protecting roots. I want to say that again. Many people are fighting fruit while protecting roots. They are fighting fear. They are fighting insecurity. They are fighting pride. They are fighting anger. They are fighting laziness. They are fighting jealousy. They are fighting anxiety. They are fighting patience without ever asking what kind of thinking has quietly nourished those things over time. Gardeners understand something impatient people often forget. You may temporarily remove weeds by addressing what is visible above the soil. Yet, unless the roots are addressed, eventually what was removed simply returns once again. Behavior frequently works much the same way. God always goes deeper than behaviors because he's always after something deeper than behavior. He's after the whole person. Here's some theological clarity for you. Information is not transformation. One of the most overlooked realities of spiritual growth is that information alone does not produce transformation. If information alone produced transformation, every believer who owns a Bible would possess remarkable spiritual maturity. Knowledge matters greatly. Knowledge simply isn't enough. James reminds us, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. James 1, verse 22. Even demons possess theological information. James tells us, you believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. James 2, verse 19. That means spiritual maturity requires something deeper than accumulating information. It requires formation. Dallas Willard, one of the most influential Christian philosophers and theologians of the modern era, once observed, grace is not opposed to effort. It is opposed to earning. That distinction matters tremendously. Formation requires participation. One more time. Formation requires participation. God performs miracles in moments. Formation usually happens over years. Perhaps someone listening today has become discouraged because you sincerely love God while continuing to struggle with some of the same battles you promised yourself you would have conquered years ago. May I encourage you for a moment? Difficulty does not mean failure. Slow growth is still growth. God has never asked you to become someone else overnight. He has invited you to faithfully become who He has created you to become over time. Somebody say over time. Over time. There is tremendous hope in that truth. Here's some intellectual insight for you. Your brain is always learning. One more time. Your brain is always learning. Neuroscientists speak of something called neuroplasticity. Simply stated, the brain possesses the remarkable ability to reorganize itself through repeated thoughts, repeated experiences, and repeated practices over time. What we repeatedly think eventually becomes feeling normal to us, which means thoughts are not merely visitors passing through our minds. They are frequently becoming architects quietly shaping our lives. That observation should not surprise students of Scripture. Paul writes, "Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things." Colossians chapter 3, verse 2. Notice once again that Scripture addresses thinking before behavior. The renewing mind eventually produces a renewing life. Modern culture frequently asks, "What should I do differently?" Scripture frequently asks, "What should I think differently?" These are not the same question. And perhaps that explains why intelligent people repeatedly make foolish decisions. Knowledge does not always produce wisdom. Information does not always produce transformation. People do not merely live from their circumstances. They frequently live from years of repeated thoughts that quietly became convictions, which means renewing the mind may be one of the most courageous things we'll ever do. Because changing behavior is often easier than surrendering our assumptions. Here's a biblical case for you. The transformation of Peter. Peter fascinates me. The Apostle Peter, when we meet him early in the gospel, he's impulsive. Peter is passionate. Peter is emotional. He's courageous. Peter is inconsistent. Jesus never rejects Peter's passion. He simply refuses to leave Peter unchanged. The same man cuts off someone's ear eventually becomes the man who shepherds God's people faithfully. Think about that transformation for a moment. Peter's greatest need was never additional passion. His greatest need was formation. Jesus spent 3 years shaping Peter's thinking. He spends 3 years shaping Peter's humility, shaping his understanding, shaping his leadership. He's also shaping his dependence upon God. Peter did not simply become better behaved. Peter became a different person. Perhaps that is God's invitation for many of us today. Not merely becoming better versions of ourselves, but becoming transformed versions of ourselves. Here's something for a soul formation. What are you feeding? Every day, something is discipling us. Something is forming us. Something is forming our loves. Something is forming our desires. Something is forming our imagination. Something is forming our thinking. And eventually, something is forming our character. The question is never whether formation is occurring. The question is, what is forming you? Social media forms people. Books form people. Friendship forms people. Fear forms people. Success forms people. Failure forms people. Jesus forms people. Notice Jesus teaches, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Matthew 6, verse 21. Jesus repeatedly addresses hearts. He repeatedly addresses affections. He addresses priorities. He addresses desires. Because transformed behavior is usually the fruit of transformed affections. We become what we repeatedly love. The truth should both challenge and encourage us. Because if unhealthy thinking can be learned over time, healthy thinking can likewise be cultivated over time. Transformation remains possible. Here's something for body, an execution for you. Training the mind daily. Renewing the mind requires a few things. Renewing the mind requires prayer. Renewing the mind requires scripture. Renewing the mind requires worship. Renewing the mind requires discipleship. Renewing the mind requires discipline. Renewing the mind requires wise counsel. Renewing the mind requires intentional learning. And renewing the mind requires repeated obedience. Joshua was instructed, "Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night." Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. Notice once again the language of consistency. Transformation is rarely dramatic. It is frequently repetitive. You continue praying. You continue learning. You continue growing. You continue abiding, not because transformation happens immediately, but because God remains committed to who you are becoming. Here's the central idea. Renewing the mind is harder than changing behavior, because behavior can be temporarily modified while the mind remains unchanged. God is interested in something much deeper. He's renewing our thinking. He's renewing our affections. He's renewing our desires. He's renewing our understanding. And He's renewing ultimately our lives. God rarely begins transformation where people usually begin it. We become fascinated with performance. God remains deeply interested in formation. We become occupied with what people do. God remains concerned with who they are becoming. And perhaps that has been His invitation from the very beginning. Not merely to do differently, but to become different people through the transforming work of Christ. Because ultimately, the greatest thing God is building is not your platform. The greatest thing God is building is you. Before we close, let me leave you with one final observation. What we have been discussing today is not simply about discipline. It is not simply about habits. It is about formation. Because no one accidentally becomes stable. No one accidentally becomes normal, stable. No one accidentally becomes wise. No one accidentally becomes deeply rooted. Growth is intentional. Formation is gradual. And anything that is meant to last must first be developed beneath the surface before it is revealed above the surface. Trees do not grow tall by focusing on height. They grow tall by developing depth. And in many ways, that is exactly what God is doing in your life. He's not merely asking you to behave differently. He's teaching you to think differently, to see differently, and ultimately to become different. That conviction has shaped much of my thinking. And it is one of the reasons I wrote my upcoming book, Tall Like a Tree, 4 Secrets of Going Further Than Others. In it, I explore the principles that help individuals grow deeply, remain grounded, develop the internal strength necessary to endure long-term growth and responsibility. Here's my invitation to you. Before I close, I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Dr. Max Désir. I'm a pastor, theologian, author, and builder. And later this year in 2026, we will be launching Star Church, spiritually trained and renewed church. Star Church is a church for every nation. We exist to seek the lost, to strengthen the saved, and to stretch the leaders. Our vision is to become a life-giving, learning center that develops individuals to learn deeply, grow intentionally, and serve faithfully, resulting in the renewal of the spirit, soul, and body for kingdom impact. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to take the next step. Subscribe, follow, like, share this message with a friend, and tell them, hey, you just might benefit from this. And follow the information on the screen to join our Star Church launch team. We're currently building a launch team and are praying faithfully, looking for individuals to serve in the following area: and fellowship and connection ministry and worship ministry and media production ministry and hospitality ministry and the parking ministry and security ministry and children ministry. We also welcome those who feel called to support through administration, through outreach, through leadership development as we continue to grow. In addition to serving, we ask that you keep Star Church in your prayers as we prepare to launch. Your prayers are essential as we build with wisdom, with clarity, and with strength. And for those who feel led to support financially, you can do so through Zelle, infostarchurch@gmail.com. Cash App is Star Church FL. Additional giving options are available and will be provided on the screen. Every gift helps us continue laying a foundation, a strong foundation for what God is building. We're not building hype, we're building people. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Numbers chapter 6, verse 24 to 26. Well, here's my final declaration. Jesus is Lord. I believe it, I proclaim it, and I will see it come to pass. Take care.